Hey y'all, today we're going to talk a little bit more about some triangle properties. In the last lesson we talked about lengths of sides and measure of angles, and in this one we're going to talk about the relationship between the lengths of sides in triangles. And we're going to use the Pythagorean Theorem, something you probably are familiar with. So add this to your flip book. We're going to add three things to your flip book. We're talking about right triangles, and we're going to determine if something is a right triangle using the Pythagorean Theorem. So you are probably familiar with this. The Pythagorean Theorem says a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And the way we're going to use that is if we can take the two smaller sides, and we're going to plug those in for a and b in this formula. So a and b are the two smaller sides. And if we take the longest side, which we call hypotenuse in a right triangle, if I square the smaller sides and add them together, and they're equal to the biggest side squared, then we can call the triangle a right triangle. So even if we don't know if it has a right angle, but we know the lengths of the three sides, if we plug them into this formula and it works out that the left side is equal to the right side, then we know it's a right triangle. And the biggest thing to highlight here, the most important thing, is that the biggest side, the longest side, is always getting plugged in for C. So add this to your flip book as well. So if we take the three side lengths of a triangle and we plug them into the Pythagorean Theorem, we put the two smaller sides in for A and B, and we put the biggest side for C, and they don't end up, if both sides don't end up equal to each other, but we notice that C squared, so the right side, the biggest side squared, if that's bigger than the two smaller sides squared added together, then we can confirm that we have an obtuse triangle. That means that we have one angle in that triangle that's bigger than 90. And make a note here that this symbol is the less than symbol. We're saying that a squared plus b squared is less than c squared, or that c squared is the bigger side. And last but not least, of course, if we plug the side lengths into Pythagorean Theorem, and now we find that c squared is the smaller side, or a squared plus b squared is bigger, so the two smaller sides squared and added is bigger than the largest side squared, then we'll call it an acute triangle, which means, if you remember from a few weeks back, all the angles are smaller than 90. All the angles are acute angles. So let's do some practice, and let's, given the three side lengths of a triangle, let's figure out if that triangle is a right triangle, if it's obtuse, or if it's acute. So worded another way, let's find out if the triangle has a right angle, let's find out if the triangle has an obtuse angle, one that's bigger than 90, or let's find out if they're all less than 90 and it's an acute triangle. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write my formula, a squared plus b squared. And I put a question mark here because that's kind of what we're trying to figure out. Does a squared plus b squared equal c squared? Or is it smaller? Or is it bigger? I plug in my side lengths. I like to go from smallest to biggest, so that ensures that my c is always the biggest side. It doesn't matter if 3 or 4 are switched, as long as the two smaller sides get plugged in for a and b. Oops. Sorry about that. I'll square everything. I'm going to add 9 plus 16, and I get 25 on both sides. So I can say those two sides are equal, which makes this a right triangle. So we'll try another one. Again, I use a question mark because we're trying to figure out what symbol should go there. I make sure that I plug the two smaller sides in on the left, and the biggest side is by itself, so 22 being the biggest side. These are not always going to be listed in order. I square each number, and this left side, my a squared plus my b squared, turns out to be bigger than c squared. So that makes this an acute triangle. So it's best to maybe look at c squared at the end, and if c squared is the smaller side, then it's acute. If c squared is equal, then it's right. If this had been the larger side, then it would be obtuse. But since it's smaller, it's an acute triangle. So that means all the angles are less than 90. So go ahead and pause, try this one on your own, use the other two as an example. So again, I'm using the Pythagorean Theorem with a question mark. We're trying to figure out what symbol belongs there. I make sure 24, the biggest side, is by itself. Square everything. And I find out here that c squared is the bigger side. Since c squared is the bigger side, it's an obtuse triangle. That means that one of the angles in the triangle is bigger than 90. So I've got one you-do for you. Use the three examples we did in the lesson to help you. You're just giving me a one-word answer. Is it right? Is it obtuse? Or is it acute? Make sure you submit your answer on the Google form, and I'll answer questions in class.